So questions, just raise your hand and Jane will bring the microphone to you.
Peter Wither, I'm the chairman of MIT, and a question for Catherine. To follow up from your concluding remarks, in your presentation you talked about Tel Aviv making a decision to go and target a particular thing. Who was the they that made the decision?
It's a very good question, and I know where you're going with it. Because in that instance, it was in fact the mayor of Tel Aviv. So it was a mayor who understood what was going on, and he was very willing to basically take what was 6-7 years of pain. Because whenever one makes these decisions, there is a very difficult period of time when the status quo, current residents will yell out and say, we do not like this change, we do not like this direction of travel. And so it takes strong leadership to say, we get that, we're sort of all going to have to suck it up until, I'm proven right or wrong, quite frankly, and if it's wrong, I go out of office. Not every place has the benefit of a very strong political leader at the right moment in time. And so certainly what we did find is many of these places, that was the case. And there were either individuals who came forward and took that role. It tended to be two different patterns that happened. The first were universities, so chancellors, vice chancellors of universities often would essentially take that. They would come up with a vision, they would sell it, they would bring the master planners in, and they would essentially take that role. The second is where groups of essentially strong-minded individuals from the city came together. So it could be from a business background. And they essentially took that role as well. And we've seen that in some cases, actually. It's quite a formal structure. So Vanessa, who in the audience, was with me in Pittsburgh. And there was actually sort of, what they did is put a whole group together that was called the Allegheny Conference, because it's actually in a county called Allegheny. And it was the chief executive of every single company that's in Pittsburgh they joined. And when I was there was a big controversy because there was a new chief executive of Oracle in Pittsburgh, and he did not want to join. And this was very bad for Oracle because basically they got frozen out. So it's not actually about commercial deals and collusion. The view was you helped to put the city together and you helped to steer the city. And so another example of that is I have a client in, one of my clients is a number of UK cities, but one in particular, the mayor equivalent to the city council have utterly refused to play ball. So the place is sinking without a trace. And it's a classic local government sort of, hands in ears saying, we're just ignoring this. And again, in that instance, it's 6 individuals who are quite powerful from within the community, and they stepped forward and they said, we're not putting up with this anymore. And they've literally gone and commissioned a new master plan for the city. They're talking to Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan about infrastructure investment. And so they have quite literally come and stepped into the role of government and taken that over. So whilst it is certainly much easier to have a politician in place who's willing to do that, it is not an obstacle necessarily if there are others who are willing to take that risk.
Steve Thompson from the British High Commission in Wellington. There was an American author about 15-20 years ago, Richard Florida, who had a similar thesis, the same thesis that he was saying, attract the people rather than attract the firms. Don't do it the other way around, attract the people first. But his pitch for doing that was to build a vibrant, culturally diverse city. Caroline, one of the examples you gave was target a population, the sports and beer population, one of the examples you gave. Can perhaps you or all of them talk a bit more about targeting versus all doing the same thing?
Thank you. Yes, the famous Richard Florida book, and actually it's funny, I do correspond and talk to Richard Florida quite a bit. He's over at Brookings at the moment and doing some good stuff there. And so for those of you who are not familiar with his work, essentially his thesis is if you get creative people into a place, the creative people redesign it. And so if you get artists and sculptors and people who are big into design, that will sort of create the change. And I think certainly, there is some credence for that, particularly in places that have completely fallen apart. Detroit's a fabulous example. Artistic communities are phenomenal, to help during transitioning periods of time, because they bring things that were out of use back into use. Where I completely disagree with Richard is I don't think that that is necessarily the only population, and also I don't think that they're very effective at growing economies. They're very effective at, the first step, in some occasions. So in the cities that we talked, that we've covered off in the book, every single one did follow that pattern where they targeted a population, but you're absolutely right. It was not sort of the hipster population, as I call it. And I've learned you don't have the same hipsters we do in London, which is quite intriguing. I'm going to have to discover this. We have people with goatees and flat caps, and do you have them? They carry Proust around, and yeah, absolutely, indeed. So we have those. And so the interesting thing is that the cities, they did not, none of them really targeted those, to be completely honest. But they were very, very specific on the group. So I gave you the example of Oklahoma City, which was around sort of, good conservative folk who were doing good jobs, but different jobs than what they had there. Tel Aviv was the slightly younger, more maverick. There's a city in Korea that actually went after a completely different group, and that was the age group between about 30 and 45. Multinationals living in Asia. I mean, how specific does it get? And that was exactly what they did, and they actually reclaimed a huge amount of land from the sea, and they literally built a new place to compete again with Singapore, with various Asian cities, to say, if you are a senior vice president at Microsoft, you're going to demand that Microsoft opens an office there. It was, devilishly clever, and it's been very successful. So I think it's more about being precise about the target audience, and then being unrelenting in the way that one goes about doing it. So what I didn't talk about in the Israel example is they built a brand new neighborhood. They broke all the rules, which I think are very similar to here. The city is actually, part of it's a UNESCO heritage site, so if you think it's a difficult housing situation here, trying to deal with that, sort of in essentially a conflict zone. And so what they did is they broke all the rules, kicked everyone off, and they've actually built 30-story high-rises in a brand new neighborhood, knowing that you basically have to create the sort of housing that those, the people that you're trying to attract will need to live in. So I think, his thesis was interesting at the time, but I wouldn't agree with it. Oh, sorry, yeah, that was very selfish.
No problem. I was just trying to understand. My response is pretty short. In as much as that I think exactly what's being expressed here, I think you either do it consciously or you do it subconsciously. Right now, I think this city is actually doing it subconsciously, is that we are targeting and being prejudiced towards a particular population, particular demographic. The question is not whether that's right or wrong. The question is, do we actually know what we're doing? And I think I think we've got to make a conscious decision about what we want this city to be. You possibly know a lot more about something like Tech City UK, but I heard the story about Tech City UK, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but from what I understand, kind of in the mid to later parts of the GFC, London stood up and turned around and said, you know what, we need to find a new economy. They went out and found an area of urban renewal, which in actual fact wasn't badly degraded, but it was an opportunity, and they targeted in a not dissimilar way to the Auckland Council looking to try and through ATIP trying to target into the so-called innovation hub, tried to target into particular groups. Those groups brought with it, so they were young innovation tech. I'll say startups, but probably into the grow-up phase. Within a very short period of time, what they had discovered is that all of the major tech around the world wanted to be somewhere near that. So in actual fact, the economy they grew was a tech economy, not a startup economy, but they used the startup by being very targeted about that. And what is absolutely fascinating with that, when you see if you see a map of London, whilst they started off very, very close to King's Cross, What's right there, wasn't it? Yeah.
Old Street.
Old Street, that's right. And they started off in that area, picking about 3 or 4 buildings. Within a very short period of time, they could demonstrate where the tech was across London, and it was just dispersed right across London to the point where they are now claiming that their economy in London is something in the order of, I think, their economic growth, of the economic growth, I think about 60% of it is in tech. So it's an extraordinary kind of thing just by targeting into. So it was just a conscious decision, and I think you probably know a lot more about that as well, I suspect.
I have 2 comments. I think I love many of the outcomes that we are seeking in the city, and I have absolutely no idea how we think we're going to achieve them in terms of what is the growth. So you actually need to fuel your economy, and I think that's the point. Is where are we targeting the people that come here to create the economy to then flow through to the rest of Auckland in terms of your sustainability and housing and everything like that. And Professor Henley did some work in terms of the innovation that comes out of New Zealand and how does that compare to globally. And we are quite low politically staffed. We do not have the scale of thinking here in one centre or one city to compete with what's coming out in the innovation and patent space globally. And the only way we can compete is by joining all of our innovative thinkers across the country, and then we can start to take on the scale of, like, Melbourne, for example. We can't even get close to Sydney, let alone what's coming out of New York and Europe. So we really need to be thinking about the structure, not just who we're targeting, but the structures of how we put our ideas together and take that to the world and attract the world here along the way.
Caroline, my question is there a danger in moving towards a magnet city that we put all of our emphasis on drawing people in and don't put our creativity on actually some of the problems we already have within the city? And an example of that, I think, is that Auckland has a growing young youth population. In a few years' time, we've got a significant group of young people coming through, many of whom are actually ill-prepared to actually join in a productivity way in the community. At the same time, we're spending 57% of our social development money on people over 65. So we're heavily investing in elderly people and not investing very strongly in young people. I just wonder whether there's a danger that we put a lot of focus on drawing people into the city and becoming a magnet city and not actually address some of the possibilities which are actually already sitting there.
I think it's a very, very fair question. And I would answer it as thus, is I think, number one, in terms of what we're describing, which is targeting this new group, the reality is it takes quite a long period of time. And so it is really, really important to continue to focus on the issues, that are here in the city. But with that said, changing aspiration and changing messages can be extremely helpful. And so to a certain extent, what we have found is, by putting some of those features in place, it's sort of like a rising tide, it brings everyone up. So let me give you an example, because that was a bit opaque. In Bilbao, where they had a similar situation, so there were a lot of very young people and a very large population of older people. And so they were again going through and targeting people who were really looking at technology and design, so they went through quite a particular emphasis. One of the things that they invested in is they got Philip Stark, sort of, because this was all about design, thinking about this. So they got Philip Stark to build what was just the most magnificent big civic centre in the middle of town. So it had one of the most extraordinary libraries, it had a municipal swimming pool, it had a small cafe, a place where people could learn how to cook. Just extraordinarily beautiful. And it was used literally all through the day and all evening. And when we went there, I think one night, it was at like 11 o'clock at night. I mean, it was an insane point. The library was absolutely full of young people who were all studying together, something that had never happened before because they were usually stuck in their homes on their own. There was essentially like a reading room that was a bit like a big, beautiful Philip Stark designed, reading room. that had newspapers from all around the world, it was full of older people. Because as opposed to sitting in their homes by themselves reading the newspaper, it was actually nicer to do it in this big community space where you sort of felt like you were in someone's living room. And so you had this fantastic juxtaposition of the old and the young who were from Bilbao. These were the kids growing up, not all from great neighborhoods, who were coming to this place. And it created this, quite big community spirit that also started a whole kick-off movement into investing more in libraries, because people realized, oh my God, libraries can be fantastic places. And so I always thought that was a really interesting example where they didn't go and say, let's put more money in education, let's, change the curriculum, let's think about, tech skills or the like. But it was by that focus on that cluster, that group in that way, created an outcome that probably never would have happened otherwise. So whilst those features are important, and of course it is important to focus on education more than anything, I wouldn't see the two being necessarily mutually exclusive.